name's Joanna Patterson. I'm an education specialist with the Allegheny County Office of Behavioral Health. So basically, I'm an advocate for students with and children with special needs. I work with all the school districts in Allegheny County and can do consultation for other families, but we really stick to Allegheny County. If there's somebody that's outside of Allegheny County and you're having trouble finding advocacy services in your area, if you would call in, we can kind of guide you in a direction to find somebody that can work with you. In terms of our offices in Allegheny County for our local families to the Pittsburgh area, we offer many different services out of our office, but two of the ones that I'm going to share with you today are our school-based liaison services. So our school-based liaisons are our mental health professionals. They work with school districts to ensure that kids get set up with services. They participate on school district SAP teams. And in terms of the school-based liaisons, they're divided by school districts, which is listed here. I'm going to share this with the Parent Alliance, and they'll be able to share this out to anybody who would like to have this form. And then we have our education specialists. This is the position that I do. We have 4 of them at the county. This is a free service to families in Allegheny County. We provide consultations for IEPs. We can attend meetings with parents to help them get what they need from their school district. We could talk to you about the law and how what you're requesting applies within the law, and just guide you through the process to ensuring that your child's IEP is in place to best meet their needs. I'll just give you a second to look at that, and then we'll move forward to the next one. So we have many different types of advocates when we're working with students in school and special education. So a lay advocate, so this can help a parent resolve their issues with school districts. They also have specialized knowledge of the legal rights of parents and students in the special education realm. The educational advocate, this is the position that I participate in and what my job field is in. And we also have specialized knowledge where we can go in and support families to work through the IEP process, go through your IEP documents with you to kind of tell you if the things in there seem appropriate or if there are additional asks that we can get from the school district. School personnel can be advocates for students as well. A lot of times it's difficult for a school personnel. A lot of times they may have fear of losing their job if they advocate too hard for a student. We've had teachers in different school districts that have referred families to us to help with that process, to help students get what they need. Parents are the strongest advocate for a child. You have raised this child, either since they were born or since they came into your care, and you know everything about them from beginning to end to share with the school to really push for what your child needs in the school setting. And then a student, many times students can be a strong advocate for themselves as well. We encourage that as students are going through the IEP process, even from a young age, that they understand that they have an IEP, what's in the IEP and what their needs are and what things they can ask for in the process. So we talk about special education, and we know that special education is the use of that specially designed instruction and related services that are really individualized to each child to meet their disabilities within the school setting. IDEA is our law that governs our IEPs and our special education services. So students are entitled to that free and appropriate public education, which means the district shouldn't be asking or charging parents for services that are provided, for transportation, for therapies that are provided within the IEP. It's at no expense to the parent. Students eligible for special education are supposed to be educated in the least restrictive environment, and that's determined by an IEP evaluation that is done on a student and the team meets. The parent has input on that as well. So oftentimes as parents, we don't want you to feel like you don't have a say in what happens. You have a lot of say in what happens to your student in the school setting. When we talk about our least restrictive environment, we always want to look at the regular education and general education classroom to see if that particular support, if that particular placement can meet the student needs before we move to more restrictive placements. IEPs and IDA cover special education and related services. So how are students taught? What services do they need to be successful? Supplementary aids and services are also covered under this. So what accommodations and modifications do they need to be successful? And says that this must be developed into an individual education plan that is developed by a team of people. A lot of times the parent might say, well, how do I know when I should request special education services for my student? Here's a couple of red flags that we really look for when we're talking about possibly requesting special education for a student. If we're seeing a student that's continually failing and we can't figure out what the cause is, if this kid comes home every day, they're doing their homework with the parent seeing them struggle through the homework, they're in class, they're participating, then that might be a red flag to say that we really need to look at providing some more intense services. If the student has difficulty in reading or math, if they are having trouble sounding out words at a time where they've been taught to read, and if they have a lack of organizational skills, those are all important in the academic realm to ensure that students are having their needs met. In terms of emotional needs, this can qualify a student for an IEP, and we're going to talk a little further about what it takes to qualify a student under emotional disturbance and for emotional support services in the school setting. And then our kids who have ADHD, chronic ADHD that adversely affects their educational performance can qualify a student for an IEP or kind of indicate to us that we may need to ask for that special education evaluation. And a big topic that's come up, really in the last few years is talking about the effects of lead poisoning and how that may require our students to then qualify for special education due to those adverse effects on their learning. Now, we talk about how does a student qualify for services under special education. So there are 13 disability categories that a child can qualify under. We have autism, and so there's a child that's diagnosed with autism, and then they have to meet educational criteria for an IEP and have to need specially designed instruction in a school setting in order to qualify for an IEP under autism. Not every student that has autism will qualify for an IEP. Sometimes they may just qualify for a 504 plan. We have a category of deaf blindness or emotional disturbance, deafness. A student may be hearing impaired and need additional services under an IEP. Students with intellectual disabilities, multiple disabilities, students that have orthopedic impairments, or other health impairment is really a catch-all category. So if a student is diagnosed with ADHD, they don't necessarily fit into the categories listed here, but they could be placed under other health impaired or other health impairment in order to qualify for services. We also have specific learning disability. So this is guided by a school psychologist will go through with a student and go through an evaluation to determine if a student qualifies for a specific learning disability, speech and language impairment, traumatic brain injury, and visual impairments, including blindness. Having a disability is not enough to qualify. Through that evaluation process, it would be determined if a student needs specially designed instruction to be successful. There's a couple categories that I want to go a little more depth into when we're talking about emotional disturbance. So there are 5 different areas that we look at when we qualify a student for an IEP under emotional disturbance. So these conditions should be shown over a long period of time. It's not just short spurts of different behaviors happening or different areas of concern. It's a long period of time. So 6 months or more, we'd see these behaviors displayed that fall into one of those 5 categories. The 5 categories are an inability to learn that can't be explained by intellectual, sensory, or other factors, inability to maintain interpersonal relationships. I had a family that I worked with that the school didn't want to qualify them under emotional disturbance, but the family stated and felt that they needed that support. So the school had said at multiple meetings prior that the child had difficulty maintaining interpersonal relationships with other students and with staff members. So we were able to use that to qualify them under emotional disturbance. Inappropriate types of behaviors and feelings under normal circumstances, a general pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression, and that tendency to develop physical symptoms associated with personal or school problems. So this may be a student who develops a stomach ache if we're trying to get them to go to school. If they have a test, they're developing those physical symptoms that are significant and severe in certain circumstances. And then I wanted to go in a little further in specific learning disability. So a school psychologist for specific learning disability will look, and they will do different evaluations with a student to determine if they qualify under this category. So they'll do an IQ test and they'll do an achievement test. And through those evaluations, they'll want to look and see if there's a discrepancy between what the child's potential is and what they're actually able to do. This discrepancy usually is about a 20-point discrepancy for students. And then they would go and they would make goals based off of what the child's needs are. In this category, when we look at a specific learning disability and a school psychologist does an evaluation, we would want them to be very specific about what area is the specific learning disability in and how does it affect the student. We don't want to just generalize it as a specific learning disability in reading. What areas of reading does their specific learning disability need addressed in, and how can we address those needs? Whenever we talk about requesting a comprehensive evaluation, oftentimes, parents will write a letter and just state that they want a comprehensive IEP evaluation. We encourage families to be very specific about this letter. Be specific about what you want a child evaluated in. Do we want the psychological testing, including that full-scale IQ? We want to ensure that they're collecting current baseline academic data. We don't want to see old data used to determine qualification. Kids change all the time. Their needs change depending on what the child's disability is, their ability to perform, and that baseline academic data can change frequently. If a student has behaviors, we'll want to insist that the school district does a functional behavior assessment. And in terms of that functional behavior assessment, we'll want to see lots of observations done. If we have a kid that has behaviors, a kid that has social concerns, a kid that has autism, we would want them to be observed in multiple environments in the school to ensure that we're looking at where all of their needs are. So we would want to see them observed at recess or at lunch, because those are unstructured social times, especially if we're looking to get social goals added to an IEP document. Students would have a speech evaluation. If there's physical concerns in the school setting, a physical therapy evaluation. They can have occupational therapy, and we talk about occupational therapy and we talk about speech. We're not just talking about articulation. We're not just talking about the ability to write. The two other areas that we could talk about in these evaluations, for speech, we could talk about social language, we could talk about problem-solving language. For occupational therapy, we could talk about an occupational therapist doing a sensory profile for a student to build appropriate sensory supports in for a student. And if they wouldn't qualify for full service, we can ask that an occupational therapist participates on the team to give guidance as to how to implement those things in the regular education classroom or in the special education classroom. Students can have assistive technology evaluations. If they have trouble with if they have dyslexia, they could have books that are read to them by electronic means. If we have writing concerns, they can have typing programs or speech to text where they could speak into a computer. If they have difficulty with listening and speaking, that reading area, organization and memory, there are several things with organization and memory that technology can help our students with. Now we need to remember though, when we're requesting evaluations, everything should be done in writing. We don't want to just go to a school and ask them or ask the teacher for an evaluation, because that teacher can always claim that it was never asked for. And then we end up in a situation where we're waiting and we think the evaluation has started, but it hasn't been. I tell parents, find a way to get notice that there was a receipt of the letter that was sent. So you can either do that by sending it certified mail, or if you're close enough to the school and have the transportation to get there, you could take that letter into the office, write the date on the top, write down who accepted that letter, and then get a copy back for yourself to keep that for documentation to ensure that we're getting the process started on time. So there are certain evaluation procedures that come after we request the evaluation. The parent will request the evaluation, and then the school has 10 days to give their permission to evaluate form. Sometimes the school will give a parent what they call a permission to evaluate request form. This form buys the school 10 additional days to collect data prior to giving the parent the permission to evaluate form. If you feel strongly that your child needs an IEP, then we would get that permission to evaluate form right away without delay of that permission to evaluate request form. After the permission to evaluate form is signed and returned, the school district will then have 60 calendar days to complete the evaluation. Now, this isn't when the parent submits their letter requesting the evaluation, but it will be once they sign the permission to evaluate and return it. So this will include all school breaks during the school year, including holidays and weekend. The only time that this timeline will stop is over a summer break in most instances. Some school districts will still complete evaluations over the summer. The one area where they would not be able to complete the evaluation is getting the observations needed to qualify a student for services. So there may be a break in that timeline during the summer, and then it picks back up on the first teacher day of the school year. So it's not the first day that the students start back, but the first day that the teachers start back. School districts are really kind of in a jam right now. They had school closures that put their evaluations behind, but that does not make it so they can extend a waiting list to parents or students. School districts must still continue to evaluate the student, and they must get that done within that 60 calendar day timeline. If the school district refuses to evaluate, they have to give the parent a NOREP, a notice of recommended educational placement, that states why they're denying the evaluation, and then the parent can put their procedural safeguards into place. So they can ask to go to mediation, they can ask to go to due process, or they can ask to have an informal meeting with the school district. We say that you start with the informal meeting first to try to resolve the dispute. If that doesn't work, then you go to mediation, and kind of the last straw, final step would be to request that due process hearing. What should be in the evaluation? So if this is initial evaluation, the first time a student is being evaluated, we would want to see all of the things listed here as part of that evaluation, as long as these areas are all of concern. So we would want to see that psychological evaluation, looking at the achievement and the IQ testing, interviews with teachers, interviews with parents, interviews with any other person that has contact with that student on a regular basis. The parents are usually asked in this process to fill out questionnaires. We would have the parents fill those out as well so that your voice is heard in the process. Observations. So your child should be observed in the classroom. If there are social concerns, as I said, we would want to see them observed in less structured settings. Cafeteria, playground, special classes, music, art, library, to see if the concerns are spilling over into those other areas. So there may be some additional education testing that is done. So these might be your curriculum-based assessments that are done in the classroom, your state assessments that are done. If a student is at 3rd grade, they would start taking the PSSAs. We can use those types of testings to see if a student would qualify for special education services. Anytime that we have concerns with behavior, so this isn't just outward behaviors that we see in the classroom. So this isn't your child that might be flipping desks in the classroom. This can be kind of those innate behaviors, the ones that aren't seen all the time, that may be associated with, say, ADHD. So a student may have attention concerns or issues that need addressed. Those behaviors can be addressed through a functional behavior assessment as well. We want to see the related services areas assessed for, so your occupational therapy, your speech, your physical therapy. That assistive technology evaluation can qualify a student for technology from low tech to high tech. So it might be anything from a PEX board where the student is putting pictures for communication to an iPad with a communication program on it. And then we always want to see that parent input. We want to hear what you have to say about what you think your child's learning looks like, as well as how that learning looks when the child is at home. Are they able to do the skills at home that they've learned at school? Because we need all of these skills to carry over into the real world. And then at times, a school district will do an evaluation and the parent may not agree with the evaluation. So a district may do an evaluation and qualify a student under emotional disturbance, but a parent may feel that their child qualifies in another area. If the school district does an evaluation and child does not qualify, those are just some areas where you can request an independent educational evaluation at the district's expense. The school district does have a right to refuse to pay for the evaluation. If they do, they have to file for due process against the parent. And then both parties will go to court, describe each of their positions, and a due process hearing officer would then decide if the independent evaluation gets done or not. I've had very few school districts that have refused to do an independent evaluation. In the long run, it's more expensive oftentimes for a district to refuse the independent evaluation than to just choose to complete it. If a school district goes to due process over an independent evaluation, the school district then has to pay attorney's fees. So they'll have to pay their solicitor to come in and work the case, which is often way more expensive than just paying for the evaluation to begin with. School officials must consider the results. Depending on the situation, I've only had it, I think, once where a school district did not agree with the results. And that was due to the fact that the independent evaluator did come in and do an observation, but they did an observation when the child had a substitute in the classroom and the student was diagnosed with autism. So in that instance, the evaluator was qualifying them under many different areas for disability, partially based off of an observation that was done in non-ideal conditions. So it wasn't when the regular teacher was there. It wasn't when a teacher was following the same structure that a student would follow on a daily basis. Now, after we complete the independent evaluation, or if we complete the regular evaluation and we agree with that evaluation, then we'll schedule an IEP meeting to start organizing and getting together what supports and services that a student has. A parent can request a draft IEP ahead of time to review. The school district will come to the table with a draft IEP. They're not doing this to exclude the parent from the process, but if we were to have IEP meetings where we're sitting down at the table and drafting a document at the table, those could be many hours to many days in terms of an IEP meeting. So we will work from a draft, start from there, and any parent that's at the table can give their opinion of what's in that document and request changes as they move forward. When we talk about what we do to prepare, we want parents to organize and review their file. So they may organize their items in a 3-ring binder, and we would want to save all the documentation on students to kind of track what changes have happened, what concerns we have for a student, what areas we need to address. So saving IEPs, evaluations, notice of recommended educational placements that have been signed to determine what the school district has agreed to do for a student. Any discipline referrals, these are important at times. There are districts that make these kind of disappear, which we don't want to see. We want to see all the information taken into account. Just as the school district has a contact log, as a parent, I would create a contact log as well to keep track of how often does the school call you, how often are they reaching out to you in terms of behavior or academic concerns. Save all notes from past meetings. So as a parent, you can take notes. If we're with you, we can take notes as well. Or you can always bring other people with you. So if you have a friend that wants to come with you, if the child's grandparent wants to come, if there's another professional that comes with you, you could bring your TSS or your BSc, or a mobile therapist that could participate in a meeting with you to help through the process. And then you'd want to keep signed copies of all information from the school in that binder as well. Before an IEP meeting, you would want to review that file or have someone to sit down and review it with you so nothing is missed. Reviewing the IEP, comparing current testing with past performance and past testing to make sure that a student's making progress. Ascertaining, do you have additional concerns that you want to bring up at the meeting to make sure that they're all captured? And reviewing notes from prior meetings and contact logs. It's important to brainstorm before a meeting to say, well, these are the things that I want to ask for. What if they say no? What can I say to them? What if the school has a different thought from them? How can I go through and brainstorm ideas of how to work through that disagreement with the school district? And then we always say to create an agenda. So as parents, I encourage you to create an agenda to take to a meeting. The first part of that agenda that we would really push to focus on was the student strengths. A lot of times it's so frustrating for parents to walk into a meeting because oftentimes they'll start a meeting by telling you everything negative that your child has done. And then maybe later in the meeting, we get to the student strengths, but that becomes kind of a glazed over part of the IEP. So we want to put those student strengths right at the forefront of the meeting, because we can use those strengths to address areas of the IEP. And then we would move to the challenges. So is there challenging behavior? What are the academic challenges that the student is having? If there are any family challenges that are currently going on, I know we've had a lot of change for families, jobs, living situations, struggles for families, especially during the pandemic. We would want to bring those to the school's attention to see if there's any assistance that they could give. School challenges. So this more focused on what are the teachers saying. If you're creating this agenda prior to the meeting and you know some of the school challenges, you would put some of those in here. If you don't, we would just put this on as an agenda item that we can all discuss and work through. And then we would talk about the students' needs. So what do they need in their programming to be successful? And then what steps need to be completed in order to drop a plan and successfully, work through the process. And then at the meeting, we say it's important that you dress appropriately for a meeting. It doesn't have to be that you're putting a 3-piece suit on, but dress so that it would be appropriate in a school setting. As I said, you could bring a relative or a friend to take notes and support through the meeting. Sometimes as parents, you may get involved in a meeting and you may really be concerned about something, and then you've missed what different people are saying. That friend or that relative may be able to keep track of the things that you may have missed, so that you can kind of move through the process and continue to know what's going on at the meeting. We would say bring the parts of your file that are important. Depending on the student's age and how long they've had an IEP, a student's file could be extremely large. So you would bring documents from your file, such as the last evaluation report, the student's previous IEP, and any forms of progress that have been sent to you. If there are notes or letters from a teacher, if there are additional discipline referrals since the IEP is put into place, we would encourage you to bring those as well. As a parent, it's important to arrive early to a meeting. We don't want to keep schools waiting. There are schools that will take and they will end a meeting very quickly if a parent is running behind. And we want to ensure that we have strong working relationships with school districts to successfully move forward and help students succeed in their education. When it comes to the IEP team, there are required members of the team. So parents, we would want to see both parents at the table when possible. One regular education teacher if the child is participating in regular education. One special education teacher. An LEA representative for the school district. This could be a principal. It could be someone that's assigned to make the decision. But if we're asking for anything that revolves around money, so if we're asking them to spend money on transportation, if we're asking for an outside placement, if we're asking for a one-on-one aid, if we're asking for different programming, we would want to ensure that the LEA is the person that can make those financial decisions. Oftentimes, the principal is not that person because they have to go back to the special education director and ask for those resources. If an evaluation was done, we would want an expert there who can interpret those test results. Others can attend. They're not legally required to attend, but they can. In terms of a translator, if a student has English as a second language, if the family speaks a different language and needs an interpreter or a translator at the meeting, it is legally required that the school district provide a translator through the IEP process. And then we say student when appropriate. Some students are excited and ready to attend their meetings at a very young age. Some students are not. The student should be invited to their IEP from age 14 and up. That doesn't mean they're required to attend, but they should be invited. Some of our students, they may be invited to the IEP meeting, but they're just not comfortable in attending. Here are some 5 rules for success that you could keep in mind as a parent. So a parent should know what they want. So that goes through that brainstorming and that creating the agenda, really figuring out what do you want and bringing forward the facts to support what you want. So if it's additional support in reading, excuse me, you would bring forward to the district the facts that support the reason why a student needs additional reading support, or if it's behavior, bringing those discipline referrals, bringing the contact log with multiple calls from the school district would be very important. Don't blame or criticize. We try to, approach an IEP meeting, even though it can be a very emotional situation, where we stick to the facts. We tell them what we need. We tell them why we don't need something. We'll tell them why we disagree with what a school is recommending. If we have a team member who a parent has difficulty with, or if you don't agree with the math teacher or the social studies teacher has done something that you don't agree with, oftentimes we say, let's push that to the side. We'll ask for a separate meeting with an administrator to address that particular issue. We always want to protect the parent-school relationship. Your child will be in that school district for many, many years, depending on their age and grade level. We want to make sure that we can keep that relationship moving in a positive direction. And then we talk about seeking win-win solutions for problems. So sometimes we have to flex and kind of move in the middle to figure out how to get appropriate supports in place for students to help them be successful. And then understanding the school district's position. So we want to know, why do they disagree? Why don't they feel the child needs support? And what are they basing their decision off of? And then we'll begin to develop and revise the IEP. As we said, those student strengths and needs, we can find them in the evaluation. If it isn't based off an evaluation, if we're just redoing the IEP, the parent can share those strengths and needs with the district as well as the teachers that are participating in the IEP. We'll want to see individualized IEP goals in the IEP that are based off the particular student's needs. And then if there are support services, we would like to see them added to the IEP. Support services such as door-to-door busing, except in terms of busing, it has to be a student need. It can't be a need of the parent. So we would have to specify, why does a student need that door-to-door transportation? As well, if a functional behavior assessment is completed, it may be found that a student needs a positive behavior support plan, and that should be completed to address behavioral or social challenges for a student. These are just some examples, some non-goal examples. At times we'll see these in a student's IEP. Something like the student will be able to answer reading comprehension questions. There's a lot of missing components to that. What grade level are they reading at? Or is there an instructional level that's different from their grade level? We should specify that within the IEP goal. And how often should they be able to do that, and with what accuracy? Saying the student will learn mathematic concepts is a non-goal example. It's very generalized, it's too basic, and there wouldn't be a way to really track that for data. As we move forward, we're going to talk about what IEP goals should look like. So we have SMART IEP goals. We want them to be specific. So this is where we talk about specific to grade level, specific to skill a student is learning, and specific to a student's needs. Measurable. They need to have numbers and quantifiable means to figure out how often a student is doing something to determine if they're making progress. We want them to have action words in them. So what will the student be able to do? What will they be able to accomplish, and what can they achieve? Realistic and relevant. Sometimes we have special education goals that are very unrealistic for a student to achieve in a 1 year's time frame, because that's what we're looking for. 1 year, and that's a calendar year, not a school year, because IEPs may be developed at any time during the school year. So in 1 calendar year's time frame, we want to know what's a child supposed to accomplish, and time limited is that 1 year's time frame. So IEP goals should be developed using that baseline data that we talked about earlier. So for an annual goal, we may look at comprehension. So for this first academic annual goal, 6th grade level reading passage, James can answer comprehension questions increasing from 75 to 85% accuracy on 4 consecutive biweekly trials. So that gives us, where do we want him to perform and what grade level is he starting at? We can do that for behavior as well. For the behavior goal, we've outlined specific behaviors we want the student to participate in, and we've set the baseline and what we want it to increase to. Sometimes goals might be written for a more short term, and then it would be noted in the IEP what that tracking would look like for that goal. For this social goal, first semester goal, James will interact with peers socially and appropriately, tone, volume of voice, keep hands to himself, and not invade personal space. increasing from 65% to 75% on 3 consecutive weekly averages. So just some things to keep in mind when we're looking at goals in an IEP in terms of what they should look like. Least restrictive environment came about quite a few years ago. There was a group of parents that sued the PA Department of Education because those students were being removed from the school district and they weren't being given the opportunity to come back. So they were just kept out of their school district for long amounts of time. This is where we take and we want to look at what is the least restrictive environment for a student. So is it the general education classroom? Do they need to be in a different classroom? And even though we say a student should start in the least restrictive environment, that doesn't always mean the general education classroom, because some students really do need specialized placements and they really don't have the time to go through that entire continuum of supports, because the amount of learning that they would lose in that process would be way too much. And then in an IEP, we talk about accommodations and modifications. This slide gives a list of what some of the accommodations can be. And these just help students learn from the same materials as their classmates. So they may need extra time to take a test or a spell checker. In terms of preferential seating, that's something we'd want to be very specific on. What does preferential seating look like? Do they need to be in the front of the room? Do they need to be in the back of the room? Do they need to be near positive peer role models in order to be successful? And then we talk about modification. So this is when the curriculum has to be changed or modified for a student that is lagging behind their peers in order for them to catch up. So they might get shorter or easier reading assignments. They might have less material, less complex material. They might need alternate assignments or assessments, modified homework. Their classes may be changed to a pass, no pass option. And in mathematics, they may be offered a calculator in order to be successful. And then we'll talk about some post-meeting strategies. So we've gone through this IEP, we've gone through the IEP meeting and through this entire process. So after the meeting, these are just some things to do to ensure that you're remembering what has occurred at the meeting and what the needs might be to determine if there's additional things to address with the school district. So you'll want to take down your recollections immediately after the meeting. So write down all the notes, retake notes. If there's something that you remember right after the meeting, get that down in that note so you could keep track of it in case there's something else to address with the school team. You can write a thank you letter to the school team to say, thank you for meeting with me. These are great parts of the meeting. I understand this is what we've agreed to. And then if there's some unresolved issues, you could put those in this thank you letter. So what should you look at in an IEP from year to year? So we talk about progress monitoring, review the IEP goals from annual updates to see have the goals changed. Is the child making progress? Examine the benchline academic data to see if the student's reading level has changed, if their math level has changed, to determine if those should change in the IEP. And then reviewing assessment data. Those are important to see what growth the student has made and if we need to address other areas in the IEP. So data collection takes on many forms in a school district. Data collection can be collected by school personnel. At times, parents can assist with data collection. If we're talking about behavior, you can use tracking sheets to monitor behavior, time on task, and work completion. And a lot of times, the data collection that we're doing is important to make determinations such as needs for a one-on-one aid, change in classroom position, so move from a general education classroom to an emotional support classroom, needs for bus monitors or specialized transportation. Or do we need to keep the positive behavior support plan in place or change it for the student to be successful? And data is vital to make determinations on students' school placements. Now, here are some common problems that we come across. You may move to a new school, or in a different year, you might change to a different IEP team. Parents can create an all about me book about their child to pass on to the new school team or to a different IEP team within the same school district. So this can outline the student's strengths and needs. different parts of a student's IEP, different likes that a student has for a team to use to develop supports and services. A lot of times a school might come and say, we can't do that. Some school personnel will give legal advice whenever it's not their place to do so. Some school personnel don't know enough about special education law in order to make those determinations. At times, we don't continue to argue a point, but we'll step away from that point. We may bring it up again later, or we may regroup and bring that up at a different time. And then we may ask more questions to determine where a school district stands to help determine how we can come to that middle ground to solve the dispute. The law doesn't allow us to do that. We hear this at IEP meetings all the time. There are areas where you could find copies of the law to bring to an IEP meeting, depending on different circumstances that a parent's in. You can highlight some of that to bring it to the school team ahead. And then if the school district says it's in the school policies or guidelines, ask for a copy of that. It may not be in those policies, or those policies may be against the actual laws that are in place. In terms of the draft IEP, as we said, you should ask for that about 10 days ahead of time. If the district doesn't have it, we can really push for them to get that into place and get that started. And you could still make any revisions at the meeting. That isn't a set in stone document. No IEP is a set in stone document. You can always make revisions as you see different challenges and concerns for a student. Meeting ends without resolution. So sometimes you may come to an end of a meeting and we may not have agreed on all parts of the student's IEPs. We can ask for additional time to finish the discussion, schedule a follow-up meeting, schedule a meeting with just a particular staff member to discuss the data and whatnot, and then bring that back to the whole IEP team. You can use tracking sheets for this. Keep track of what did you ask the school for? What was the school's response, to know if we need to continue to ask for something or if we can move forward from that issue. And then what do you do if you have a dispute with the school? So a school may present an IEP, they may present, supports in the IEP that you don't agree with. They'll present a no-rep after the IEP meeting, that notice of recommended educational placement. At that point, you can request an informal meeting to discuss the options. Usually we start with that first. And if that doesn't go well, or if we haven't come to a resolution, you can request mediation. If mediation doesn't work, then you would request a due process hearing. For mediation, it's the parent's responsibility and for due process to set that up. So on the notice of recommended educational placement, school districts will usually share with you how to set up for mediation. An advocate can help you set up for mediation in different areas. And then you always want to make sure to return that no rep if you disagree, so that the school district doesn't move forward with what they want to do without your consent. There's also a complaint procedure in Pennsylvania that you can use if you feel that school districts are violating your child's IEP. So you'll file the consumer request intake form, which can be found on the Pennsylvania Department of Education website, and you'll mail it to this Chief Division of Compliance and Monitoring, and they'll look at the complaint, see what was in the IEP, what should have been in the IEP, and determine what steps are needed to move forward. This can also include compensatory education for students. The Office for Dispute Resolution is who handles our mediations and our due process hearings. They also have a consumer intake line, the special education consult line, where you could call in, ask them a question. Usually you have to leave them a message, they'll call you back, and you can discuss it with the special education consult line, and they can give you ideas of how to move forward on the issue. And then here's 3 websites that we often use to get more information. We have the Education Law Center. They have several handouts, guidance in terms of different special education topics. Patan is located in Pittsburgh and across different parts of the state. They can provide resources and materials. They also have trainings that they have throughout the school year and over the summer that parents can attend. They have when the trainings would be in person again. They do have parent scholarships that cover the cost of the training. They cover the cost of the lodging arrangements as well as a food stipend. And then we have Wright's special education law. This can give you basic information and instruction for families, as well as updates on case law. Sometimes Wright Law has free trainings that are close to Pennsylvania. Sometimes they are in Pennsylvania. It just depends. And then if you're in Allegheny County, this is all of our education specialist contact information. Feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any needs. If you're outside of Allegheny County and you're having trouble finding an advocate, you can also reach out to us as well, and we can try to help you find someone in your area or give some basic advice to move forward.